As demonstrations against federal immigration enforcement continue to grow, some Republicans are escalating their language, and they're now branding demonstrations in Minnesota as, quote, an insurgency, which is a term that is usually reserved for war zones, not here in America. Now, this comes as Graham Plattner, Democratic Senate candidate and Marine combat veteran in Maine, urged his supporters to adopt nonviolent resistance methods against Trump's immigration crackdown, telling them to, quote, join watch groups, rapid response teams, and intelligence collection networks to alert citizens and potential targets to the presence of federal immigration agents in their communities. Don't just join a signal thread and monitor it. You've got to get in a room with people. You've got to develop relationships and trust, Plattner said. Joining us now is Democratic candidate for Senate in Maine, Graham Plattner. Graham, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for us this evening. I'll start with that point right there, which is the call to action that you are putting out there, because some Republicans have seized on it, and they've cited that kind of language as evidence that there are protests that are not organic or necessarily individuals, but rather part of a coordinated, organized, and implying something more sinister with that. And I wanted to give you a chance to respond to what you're hearing from Republicans who are saying, hey, look, this is not just ordinary Americans going to the streets to protest something they don't like, but something more sinister being organized here against the state.
Yeah, it's rather ridiculous, because literally what we're saying is you should organize with your neighbors, which is about the most organic possible thing you could have. It's rather difficult for me to take any of this seriously, to tell you the truth. I fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know what insurgency looks like. It doesn't look like people meeting with their neighbors to figure out how to communicate and show up and protect them. That's, in my opinion, that's just kind of like what we should do for our communities.
So, Graham, you support the Second Amendment. You're a gun owner. And in the aftermath of the killing of Alex Preddy, the Trump administration had several officials come out and seemingly blame Mr. Preddy for his own death because he had a legal gun on him. What have you been hearing from voters in Maine about that charge, and have you been seeing any movement among conservative gun owners who are concerned about the federal government and their overreach with ICE and Border Patrol?
Yeah, I've seen a significant shift. Like there are going to be people that will figure out ways to excuse this all the way till the end. But I have seen friends of mine who I know kind of from the gun world, I would say, who this is very much the thing that for many years they were worried about, right? A tyrannical government murdering American citizens. And to have that killing then justified by the administration because Alex Preddy was legally carrying his firearm, that he has a constitutional right to do, that's a bridge too far, I think, for a lot of even conservative voters. And I really think the Trump administration has pushed so far, has gone so out of control on this. I mean, they were stomping all over the First Amendment. They were stomping all over the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, and now they're using the Second Amendment as a reason to murder an American citizen. They are essentially becoming just an unconstitutional organization at this point. I'm curious to see when they start trying to quarter troops in our houses.
Graham, you talked about the bristling that we've seen amongst Second Amendment supporters in response to some of the comments from the Trump administration. You have yourself said some controversial things about the importance of arming oneself in the name of fascism. I know that you've since recanted some of this, but in a since deleted Reddit post, you talked about if people expect to fight fascism without a good semi-automatic rifle, they ought to do some reading of history, and some other comments along those lines. I'm wondering, do you actually think that those comments were more prescient than maybe they once seemed, given what we're hearing from this administration?
Yeah, I mean, that's a reading of history. I mean, this country went to war against fascism. That was how we beat fascism. And I don't think it's inflammatory to simply point out a historical fact, in my opinion. I also, to be fair, like I know I've been accused of using inflammatory statements. I made those comments long before I ever thought I would run for United States Senate. So like that was just my opinion as a private citizen on the internet. I personally think that, especially in this moment, our most effective method of resistance is nonviolence, hands down. And that comes from organizing. Nonviolent civil disobedience, the ability to mobilize mass amounts of people, the ability to mobilize folks to protect their communities, that is how we are going to beat this. But that needs to come from organizing and from getting people together and building that trust and, frankly, building the skills necessary. The people of Maine get to look with awe and inspiration to the people of Minneapolis. What the people of Minneapolis have showed all of us is that violence is not necessary in this moment. In fact, what is most necessary is communities getting together and protecting themselves. And I think that that is what we need to be looking at moving forward. Hence why I've advocated for people on my campaign, or just people in Maine, to join rapid response teams, join mutual aid networks. That's where the work is to be done.
Can I get more of your thoughts on sort of where the energy, I guess, in the Democratic Party is and is going right now? You tweeted recently, dismantling ICE is the moderate position. There are a lot of Democrats, both in office, but also just Democratic voters that I've been speaking to who feel the exact same way, frankly. But at the same time, there are Democrats who want to negotiate right now, with colleagues across the aisle about what can be done with DHS, who believe that more funding for training or just removing masks may be a solution. They sort of have a list of their concerns, but they still seem to speak with the language of there's something to work with here at a time when it seems more and more people feel like this is going to be very challenging, if not impossible, to reform. And I guess I want to hear your thoughts on that and where that conversation is going in the Democratic Party. If you think there is reform and possibility and conversation to be had there, or if that's over.
That's over. This organization, we have witnessed it murder American citizens on camera from multiple angles. It's also important to remember, and this is talked about enough, the people that did the killing over the past few weeks, these are folks who've been with these agencies for a long time. These weren't part of the 12,000 new hires that got 47 days of training and are still waiting to go out into the streets. So it is difficult for me to comprehend an argument that we just need to put another camera on the scene, that would stop the killing. We've seen the killings on camera from all angles. I don't think another camera would have stopped it. I also don't think that necessarily training here is going to fix it. This is an institutional problem. This is a cultural problem. An organization that is willing to go conduct this kind of violence against American citizens, that is not an institution that deserves reform. That's an institution that deserves to be dismantled, and we need to build something else. And it's important to remember, DHS, ICE, these aren't foundational bedrocks of American security. We invented these things after 9/11. They've only been around for 23 years. We used to have the INS. There are ways to do immigration enforcement that look nothing like this. We've done it differently before. We can certainly do it differently again. But these institutions have shown at this point that they are not worthy of reform, if they could even be reformed. And the people that in these institutions and those in leadership that have driven them to conduct themselves like that, we need accountability. And that is where the future needs to go. And I'm every single Democrat I know thinks this way. Hell, I know Republicans and independents that think this way. People are looking at ICE and the way it's behaving in Minneapolis, and people don't see something that's deserving of reform. They see something that's deserving of being dismantled and rebuilt entirely.